I drove the star here.
Hello, everybody. That was some good opening act, wasn't it? Whew. All right, well, I'm here to talk about mental health because, well, we'll just talk about what started this event. I think if you follow Ryan's Facebook, you probably know the story, but I'll give a little more in-depth story about that, and then we'll talk about last year, a little bit about me, and then just mental health and stuff around Summerside. Hopefully not too long, but I guess we have a little bit of time to heal, so sorry if it is too long. Most of you know the story. I started my volunteer event career when I was in the tourism program, volunteering at many events at the Atlantic Showcase, ECMAs, and the International Shellfish Festival. Then I shifted my career over to community services, which was more my passion. I hosted an event on addiction recovery. I'm sure that you have likely heard the story about how this event got started. Ryan and I'm sure a good friend Colin, talked about doing a show with bands because Ryan has a love for music, especially local music. We decided that it would be a great idea to give back to his disability, and I was looking online and I actually stumbled on a thing called World CP Day. It was actually an event that was held, I think, over in the UK. It happened to fall on October when a mental health awareness month was going on, and this is where the fundraiser idea came in. He knew he wanted to give back, so I said, why not give back to your disability, to put more money into it, because he knew what it was like to struggle with depression. Around the same time, he knew I also was passionate about mental health, so he decided that it would be a good charity to give to as well. As most of you know, we raised $1,400 last year, giving $700 to each respective organization on PDI, and we plan on splitting whatever we raise tonight in half as well. We hope to raise $2,000 as our goal. Because October was too close and too busy, we decided as December time for our annual event. So last year, our first person to talk was Jenny, and for those of you who heard it, it was a great speech, and we were lucky to hear her story. We decided, because of the weather being unpredictable, to try to keep this talk to someone that lived a little closer to the event. But when we only had 2 or 3 names in mind of who would come to speak, we were finding ourselves coming up short with the right speaker, so I took the lead. Although some people offered to help, others wanted to but felt too nervous, and that's probably a thing that might come with mental health in itself. And others just were too busy or just not able to do it. It was the right thing for me to just take the lead and talk myself being so passionate about this topic. I'm a community service worker working at the provincial government as an education assistant in the public schools branch. I'm also a community support worker at Community Connections. I see both disabilities and mental health issues in my workplace every day. I've been in this field for 5 years now and I love it. So most of you guys all know, a lot of people experience mental health issues right here in Summerside. I have heard countless of stories of people approaching myself, but also during workshop talk, not only about stigma, but a lot of persons experiencing mental health problems not being taken seriously or getting their adequate treatment. It was in these stories that I wanted to take a proactive approach and help people. This is where the event and my Facebook groups have all started from, and hopefully time I will do more. The government is working on things, and I really hope they pull through with that, what they plan on doing. And there are other ladies in the province who are starting their own centres, mostly in Charlottetown and Rustico for much needed services. I really hope with the new council place in Summerside, we are able to get some much needed services to Summerside, as it is much needed, if not more. We are lucky to have the walk-in clinics now, support meetings, the Strengthen Families program, and the addiction programs at the youth center, and the new program that they rolled out recently. But we have a long way to go. Things are growing, but not at a reasonable rate. That's where we also need to step in and do our jobs. Rome wasn't built in a day. People I know are affected by it and have been struggling for a long time. It has given me the passion to learn, advocate, collaborate, and to make changes that I'm making today and will continue to do. The one thing that's really interesting that I find is mental health in the workplace. A lot of people struggle in the workplace with it as well, and I've first-hand experienced a lot of mental health issues in the workplace. Your boss may not understand, or you could be bullied by your boss or even coworkers. We really need more awareness in the workplace in terms of mental health and ways to treat each other. There are courses you can take if you're able to do so. There are lots of ways to get help for mental health that people may not realize. I hope most people know by now, but the online is just growing so much. There are many apps out there that are free. There's therapy online now, online courses that you can learn, peer support programs online. And then a lot of things that I do is I just go to like the library and get like support books for free, or sometimes I'll go like buy them secondhand so I don't have to pay the full price. There's many other things you can do, and if you need to take medication, don't be ashamed of it. It does wonders for some people. I also administer 2 Facebook groups called Collaborating for Mental Health and Addictions and Mentoring for Mental Health and Addictions. And the last thing I want to talk about is stigma. Although things are constantly improving once it comes to acceptance of persons with mental health, there is still a lot of stigma once it comes to mental health. I was lucky to be part of a workshop put on by Hate Saskatoon that was given the doctoral students of U of S addressing stigma with their patients, particularly patients who are HIV positive. This was kind of an eye-opener for me. These persons very well could have had concurrent issues with mental health and have been impacted by severe judgment from their own doctors who are supposed to be caring for their well-being. I know stigma doesn't stop there, as there's been many stories about stigmatization right here in Summerside. I'm absolutely trying to create a change here to distinguish the stigma. Hoping to create something in 2019 that will assist with this, but what can be done is take a free online course through Canadian Mental Health. I took it and you won't be disappointed. It's called Understanding Stigma. Everyone should take it, especially those in the field of work where the patient or client may have a mental illness. I think the training is for everyone, and some of the things said in this course really made me witness that I've seen a lot more stigma in my personal and professional life than I realized. Stories about people who may think that people are just doing it for attention, or maybe because of their ethnicity or something. When I was working out in Saskatoon, there was a girl who overdosed, and because she was of Aboriginal nature, they actually sent her home long before her time. And so it happens, and as it happens here, it happens everywhere. Thank you for the time for listening to this. Now on to Joey, who will be speaking. I'm sure Doug will give him a great introduction. And to the next band, and keep raising money. Thank you. Oh, you better get here. Hey!
Ready? Come with me. Sean, maybe this is great. Here's your speaker.
I can't remember how long it was, but I think it was about 75%, 60%.
All right, right now we're going to have Joey Arsenault. He's going to talk on about CP, and just to let everybody know, this is a live broadcast. So I'm just letting everybody know we're broadcasting this show right now over the my radio station. So Ryan will have the link. It's going to be replayed again tomorrow night. Just to let everybody know, the premiere of PEI just had a little Christmas greeting for everybody on my show. So it was pretty cool. So here's Joey, I guess.
Pretty sure Mark was selling some beers.
Hello everybody, I'm Stephen Hawking's first cousin. As you can tell, we have similar voices.
Hey, the decision is not up to me.
I think mine is more sexy.
It is wherever's easiest for you to get out.
You got another door if you want to sit back there.
I would like to welcome everyone to Rockers for Recovery. We are here to help with two great courses and governance, two great
Yeah, let's go.
You cannot have anything better than that. Cara and Drive have asked me to speak to you about living with cerebral palsy. This disability has given me a unique perspective on life. I have to put more trust in people to do the day-to-day tasks. A lot of things are out of my control. So, it's always important for me to hire the best possible people who I have complete confidence in. Some of my workers turned into lifelong friends. And then, it can also ruin friendships too. Living with a disability is all about trying to think of different ways on how to do things. In one way, it keeps your creative juices flowing. I played sports during gym class or during school. The gym teacher had to adapt all of the sports so I could play. We actually played hockey at the local arena. I played goalie. I wasn't too good since my tires were spinning on the ice. But I had an advantage playing soccer. I would try to get the ball in between my wheels and then roll in for the score. It was nearly impossible for my opponents to stop this mighty beast. I'm about to give you a bio on my life, and I hope it helps you to understand the different challenges and obstacles that someone in my position faces on a daily basis. More importantly than anything, be aware that we are no different than anyone else. We all eat, drink, go to the bathroom. We just do it differently. That's all. The type of cerebral palsy I have is spastic quadriplegia. Cerebral palsy is the name for a condition in which brain damage has disrupted normal muscle functioning. Spastic quadriplegia is the most serious and disabling form of spastic cerebral palsy. It affects the entire body. Spastic refers to the muscle stiffness which accompanies the condition. Quadri comes from the Latin for four. It means that all four quadrants of the body are affected by spastic quadriplegia. Plegia comes from the Greek term for a form of paralysis. You can also have CP by having a limp in your hand or foot. So no two people are affected the same way. It definitely affected my speech, and it can affect your intelligence. This is where God was good. My intelligence is just fine. Thank you very much. I was also lucky that my fine motor skills left my right hand in good shape, so I can type. A lot of my personality, I am told, is in my right hand. My first memories in my life were crawling around with the use of one arm. I was bound and determined to find many little hiding places, including underneath tables. No one would be able to find this sneaky little bugger. One early memory that I have is falling off my high chair. It definitely caused a big ass bump on my head. Maybe that's why I turned out as crazy as I am. My mother says the next 5 years involved a lot of therapy, appointments, but at the same time I was their son first, and playtime and having friends were very important, and they made sure I had playmates and playtime. My parents' motto was to make sure all needs, both physical and emotional, and to try and have a normal life as possible, and was told by the doctor in Ottawa, if anything, please do not spoil him. They wanted me to experience life as much as possible. One thing to my advantage, I was always told I had a great smile, which helped me to get away with mischief. My first scooter came from England, and it was red, and I remember putting holes into walls at my home. Because we lived out in the country, we needed something that could take bumps well, and another young boy got one here on the island, and my father looked into it, so I got one. I was around 4 at the time, and I was definitely riding in style. I called it my bike as I used to have races around the house with my imaginary friends. Wouldn't you know it, I would almost always win. Funny how that works. It was my taste of being more independent. I could be quite dangerous, though, as my brother could probably attest to. When I was pissed off, I would try to clip his knees with my chair. What a bad little boy. As a toddler, since I couldn't speak clearly due to not able being properly move my lips and my tongue, the speech therapists gave me a symbol book to communicate with. My dad says it was quite frustrating to have a conversation with me. All that I could do is tell my basic needs. It wasn't until I learned to read or write, only then people understood how much of a devilish human being I can be. The Sunshine Foundation, an organization that grants wishes to people with disabilities, asked me to come up with 2 wishes and they will grant one of them. Now, I'm going to tell you what my first real love was and still infatuated with it to this day. It's professional wrestling. You can laugh if you want. I know at least some of you are fans. Come on, stand up if you are. Anyways, back then, I was a die-hard Ultimate Warrior fan. I had this great vision of me wrestling with him in a WWF ring. You see, visions and dreams, no matter how crazy they might be, are what inspires a person to do special things. Anyway, the other wish I had was having the old Commodore 64. My cousins had one, so, naturally, I had to get one, right? Most kids would want to go to Disneyland. Not this cat. I wanted to wrestle a 250-pound dude with a painted face and tassels on his arms. Or I wanted to be the first one to beat the computer game Space Commander. So, the day came and I was delighted to receive the computer. Eventually my other dream kind of came true. More on that later. The preparation for me to start kindergarten took my parents a full year to complete. They had to get the IWK hospital to send the school reports to prove to them I was academically capable enough to go to school. They also had to make renovations to the school, like put in ramps, make the bathrooms accessible. A teacher's assistant was hired to help with my needs during the day. We lived in the Evangeline area, which is a small Acadian community. The Evangeline School was an all-French school with grades from kindergarten to all the way to grade 12. You got to know your schoolmates very well. A couple of weeks before the start of my school career, my mother went to beautify herself at the hairdresser's, and there was a parent there, and she piped up with this odd question. Does Joey know what kindergarten is? My mum's quick response was to ask if the parent's child knew what kindergarten was, and they said yes. My mum said, well, so does Joey. One thing about having a disability that I sometimes find humorous and at other times frustrating is people's perception about my disability. Some people think I'm deaf, so they shout at me, or some think I'm intellectually challenged. You can tell by their tone of voice. I usually make a smart remark and they tend to realize their faux pas. The first few years of school went pretty well. I was never an A+ student, but I did decent for myself. The hardest thing was my brain was always in English mode, so when I write, I would think in English and then translate the words into French. I do understand the French language completely, but don't ask me to write it. There was a team approach when it comes to coordinating my daily routine at school. The occupational therapist would come in and make sure everything is situated the right way in the classroom. In those early years, we had no laptops, so I did all of my work on an Apple IIgs. I bet some of you are too young to remember those. Man, I feel ancient. My teacher's assistant would take notes for me. I would try to type what I see on the blackboard as I type with one hand, but I was never fast enough. I had to do math problems on the computer in just a regular word processor program. That was a very long and tedious task, but it had to be done. I hope they have better software nowadays. My teacher and my assistant would collaborate on which questions I would have to answer. Basically, I would receive the same base of knowledge but do less of the repetitive stuff. The list of duties of a TA included is as follows: taking notes, putting books on music stands so it would make it easier to read, turning pages as I have hard time doing it myself with one hand, collaborate with teachers about homework and testing, prepare meals for lunchtime and be there in case I choked, help with my bathroom needs. If you want me to be detailed about those needs, you can ask me, otherwise, I'll just say it's a shitty job. One of the duties that the T.T. had was to write notes to my mother about our day. I hated that. So when I caused trouble, my mother would find out right away. There was no hiding anything. In all, I had 4 main TAs who worked with me during my school career. The first 2, I don't remember much about them as I was quite young, but the first one who made an impression on me was Karen Arsenault. She was so funny and full of life. I remember one time we were both stuck in an elevator for an hour telling fart jokes. I know I had a weird sense of humor. Another time, me. My mother and Karen ventured out to St. John, New Brunswick, to a rehab facility to check out the latest voice software at that time. Karen and I were strolling down the hallway of this facility and we turned around the corner and no word of a lie, we saw an African-American version of Santa Claus, with the white beard and all. I literally pissed my pants. Karen had an even worse repercussion. After the weekend of laughter, she locked her right jaw because of laughing so much. A sense of humor is a must for this position because there are a lot of times where embarrassing things happen, like bathroom accidents. If you take it too seriously, then you will drive yourself crazy. Karen started with me in grade 4 and she developed Crohn's disease when I was in grade 6. She was terribly ill all year and then she made a remarkable recovery this summer. She was fine until Easter. On Easter Sunday, she walked into an emergency room with a bad headache and then she passed out. They rushed her to a hospital in Halifax. She ended up in a coma due to a brain aneurysm. She passed away at a tender age of 24. I was super sad. She was the first person who I was close to that had died. Her laugh is still ingrained in my mind. For grade 8, we hired another young TA by the name of Marco Thorne. This guy, to this day, I consider him one of the most influential people in my life. This guy not only did the day-to-day minutiae, but was a real role model to this budding teenager. He was a real motivator and a person who would point out on many occasions that I should make more logical decisions instead of emotional ones. I still have trouble doing that, but I keep learning. He stayed with me until I graduated high school in the year 2000. Family and friends were an essential part of my life growing up. My mother, Sally, she has fought many battles on my behalf with the school system and with government. She fought the good fight all the way for me. She sacrificed a lot for me. Don't get me wrong, we had our arguments like any mother and son would have. But no one shows more devotion and care than her. My brother Jeremy and I had a good relationship growing up. I sometimes would feel bad because he would have to take extra care of his little brother. But we grew up to be good friends. I was his best man at his wedding. It was a pure joy to see him walk down the aisle to marry his lovely wife, Regina. They have the cutest daughter ever. Catherine loves her Uncle Jojo. My father, Jerry, is a man who is a great mentor in life. He is always there when you need him financially, but more importantly with his sound advice. He got married to my second mother, Cindy. Cindy is a class human being. I'll tell you one quick story about my dad was there for me when I needed him the most. A year after I graduated high school, I was down in the dumps because most of my friends were moving on to college and having a career. And I was stagnant and not going anywhere. I needed a break because high school was mentally draining for me. While I had a great social life in high school, I never had a girlfriend. My dad noticed me depressed and he asked, "What's wrong?" I said my life was stagnant and no girls want to date me. Tears were pouring out of my eyes. He hugged me and said, "As you get older, girls will see you for you, not your disability." I shall never forget that night. And he was right. I have had a few girlfriends and many dates since. It's twofold. I have gained more confidence in that field, and as my dad said, adults are more accepting of things. My friends were great growing up. I was friends with guys who were into computers and other guys who were the class clowns. We went to parties, team dances and the movies. The hardest thing was that I had a hard time visiting with them at their houses because of the accessibility issues. But we made portable ramps and such. Accessibility is a huge barrier for people in wheelchairs. You learn to plan ahead and make whatever arrangements needed to make. I have a 400-pound wheelchair, so it's nearly impossible to take up a flight of stairs. Although it was done through the years, I highly don't recommend it. Very unsafe. After taking a few years off from school, I decided to get my feet wet in the workforce as a part of the Downtown Youth Ambassador program that was held by the East Prince Youth Development Center in Summerside. It consisted of 5 youths trying to help brighten up the downtown sector. One of the more funner activities we concocted up was doing ghost walks. It's always fun to scare the living delights out of people. We also had to find 3 job sites to work for 1 day per week. The highlight was writing a 5-week installment of interviews with local bands for the journal Pioneer. Looking back on it, those interviews were some of my highly motivated work I have ever done. An assistant for me was hired to do the more physical work. After the program was over, I was notified by the program's supervisor that she had to be coaxed into accepting me into the program. She thought I was going to be a disruption and slow things down. Admittedly, she was proven wrong as I busted my ass every day to try it to make it worth her while. I always enjoy when I change people's perspective on things. After that, I went to work for the evil empire, Walmart. I was a happy little dog eater. It was a blast for the first little while, but then it got stale and monotonous. How many times can you say welcome to Walmart before you want to pull your hair out? Seriously. I then turned my attention onto one of my biggest goals. Getting out of my mama's nest. I love her to death, but by 24 it was time to leave and gain my rightful independence. The climate for affordable, accessible apartments was scarce. We made a committee and went to the press to voice our concerns. Finally, after a few years of hard work, my break finally came when a friend notified me that him and his wife were moving into one of the 2 brand new accessible buildings that are operated by Community Connections. My occupational therapist checked the building out, and all it needed was a few renovations, like installing a ceiling lift for transferring me into bed. Disability support program accepted it, but they didn't know how to go about finding me a roommate. But I had a good hunch on who I would want for a roommate, a brainiac bartender named Greg Arsenault. He would drive me home after he finished his duties at the Heritage Pub, so we got to be great pals. We also took a trip to Connecticut to watch Ultimate Fighting in 2005. So we got to know each other quite well. My dad and I went down to the bar to ask him. And I was elated when he said yes. Everything fell into place. So, July 1st, 2006, my independence was granted on a silver platter. My freedom to do whatever the hell I want. My journey, though, didn't end there. I had to learn properly how to advocate for myself. That was a tough thing to learn, especially in my position. I still naturally try to avoid conflicts and arguments due to having to type everything. When there's tension and arguing, my muscles tend to go in a spasm. I have learned to type everything I want to say beforehand, and the person then can make a rebuttal, and then I need ample time to reply to his rebuttal. But living on your own is totally awesome, to say the least. Party time. Another huge dream of mine was being a pro wrestling manager, and I found this wrestling school online called the Maritime Wrestling Academy, and it was located in Moncton, New Brunswick. After enrolling in their school, they didn't teach me much of anything at all, and they told me that I would learn by experience. After a long discussion about whether or not they will book me on until it was filmed for a national reality series, I convinced the promoters to book me on a show in Moncton. That night was a dream come true. My stage name given to me was Dr. Zygmunt Zip, and my wrestler lost his match due to the foiled plan by yours truly. The feelings trolling back to the backstage area was nothing short of amazing. It aired on the Fight Network in the spring of 2008. Everyone who I worked with, I learned lessons from. Even the ones who ended on negative terms. My friend, who I will not reveal his identity for obvious reasons, moved in May of 2008. Greg had too much on his plate at the time, so he decided to part ways on good terms. Anyway, my friend started with his guns blazing. He did some excellent spring cleaning and was very reliable. And then, a month passes, and then he met this woman. Oh, did his priorities ever change? He wasn't home on time to cook me supper or was in a rush to leave. He stopped cleaning pretty much altogether. I wrote him up a list of duties and he said he would get back to me, but he never did. At this point, I have had enough. I really didn't want to do it, but I had to fire my friend. That day was absolutely tough. He seemed disappointed, but we ended up shaking hands. He just wanted 2 weeks' notice. That was fine, but then, one night, I went out somewhere and I came back. There was no one home, and so I went to visit my neighbor and came back and there was still no one home. At this point, I called his girlfriend's house and his girlfriend picked up the phone and said, "It's getting late, go to sleep, Joey," and click, she hung up. I slept in my chair as I didn't want to wake my parents up. Needless to say, he picked up his stuff the next day. The lesson here is to make sure the people you hire was the right fit. This guy couldn't hold on a job, so probably I should not have hired him in the first place. Lesson learned. One big passion of mine right now is traveling. My first big one was a tour across North America. The trip was truly a life-altering experience. It is a massive world out there and one that is beautiful. We had relatives from Boston to Victoria, BC, graciously letting us stay the night at their homes. We drove 10,000 miles from the East Coast to the West Coast and back. I would have gone another 50,000 miles, but my uncle Marcel and Greg were ready to come back home. I must say that there are too many stories to tell about this trip. Maybe I'll tell those next time. The highlight for me though was the grandeur of Las Vegas. I have no doubt in my mind that I'll move there someday. Then I went to WrestleMania last year in Orlando, Florida. It was one of my dreams since I was 7 years old. What a massive event. There was 70,000 fans from all over the world and the production value is so amazing. And this year, I went on a wrestling-related cruise called the Chris Jericho Rock and Rager at Sea. The cruise was an incredible experience. When you are with 2,500 people who have a common love for something, you can't help but to feel the greatest of joy. I met a few people from the UK. Tremendous people. We hung out the entire time there. I met so many wrestlers from different eras. From Pat Patterson to Marty Scurll and Kenny Omega. I chatted with Ricky Steamboat about his classic matches with Ric Flair. Probably my 2 highlights was during the wrestling show. Marty Scurll was acting. He was going to shake my hand, but he flipped me the bird. It takes balls to do that to a guy in a wheelchair in front of a crowd. Then later that night, I seen him at the bar and he started to chop my chest. We had a crowd around us and they were cheering loudly. I told him to chop my chest harder and he did. My roommate Jeff heard the roar, so he came closer and he was talking to Mick Foley's daughter at the time. She was deeply concerned for my safety, but Jeff assured her I was having the time of my life. I am now awaiting my next adventure. In closing, I just want to say living with cerebral palsy is not easy, but you can still have a fulfilling life. Thank you.